My hand slammed against the polished oak table, silverware leapt, glasses tipped over. Her heel pressed against my leg, pushing me across the floor. My daughter's knot of hair tangled in her fingers as she dragged me backward, toward the door. Around us, plates shattered, people gasped, and my son-in-law stood there, his face pale with rage. "You'll sign it," he hissed, "whether you like it or not." My throat went dry. I saw my wedding photo on the buffet, the one with me and my late husband smiling, and I thought, how did we arrive at this ruin? But I stared straight at them and said nothing. I would not sign. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I stayed silent while I was hauled from the room, hair pulling, body trembling, but I did something no one expected. I made one phone call. 30 minutes later, a man walked in. He crossed that threshold, and I swear, the air changed. In that moment, their faces went blank, as though they recognized something monumental was coming. You may think you know what happens next, but stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why that single call cost them everything they ever counted on. The smell of baked chicken still lingers in my memory, seasoned just right, crisped to perfection, with rosemary from my own garden. I had spent the entire morning in that kitchen, humming the same song my mother used to hum when she made this same casserole every Thanksgiving. I wanted that dinner to feel like family again. Laughter, stories, warmth. The table was dressed in soft gold cloth. Candles flickered. The grandkids ran around in tiny socks, leaving trails of joy through the living room. For a moment, I thought we'd found peace. I thought maybe love could outshine greed, but I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. The chair creaked as I sat at the head of the table, my late husband's chair, and I remember touching its armrest, tracing the same spot his fingers used to rest when he said grace. I looked at my daughter Lydia, across the table, her hair perfectly curled, her lipstick flawless, her eyes distant. Once, those eyes lit up every time she saw me. That night, they looked through me, not at me. Beside her sat Ethan, my son-in-law, handsome in that polished way that hides something sharp underneath. He smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. When he laughed, it was the kind that didn't reach his chest, just the mouth doing its duty. He reached across the table for my hand, his fingers brushing mine with an odd familiarity that made my skin tense. "We're so grateful for dinner, Mom," he said, his tone dripping with sugar. "You've really outdone yourself." I smiled faintly, but my stomach tightened, as if my instincts were warning me that his gratitude came with a price. Lydia poured herself a glass of wine and said, almost casually, "Ethan and I have been talking about the house lately, you know, with taxes and all." I set my fork down slowly. I'd been expecting this. It wasn't the first time they brought it up. "The house?" I asked, pretending not to know where this was going. "Yes, Mom," Lydia said, looking at me with that practiced sweetness. "We just want to make sure everything's in order. You're not getting any younger, and it's important to keep your assets safe." Ethan nodded, leaning forward, his voice a little firmer. "You're old, Mom. It's time to make sure your assets are safe." The room grew quiet. Even the laughter from the kids faded into the background. My fork clinked softly against the plate as I looked from him to my daughter. "Safe for who, Ethan?" He gave a small laugh, the kind meant to make me seem unreasonable. "For everyone. It's just the smart thing to do." Lydia set her glass down a little too fast, wine spilling at the edge. "Stop being dramatic. We're just planning for the future. It's what Dad would have wanted." I almost choked at that. My husband, their father, built this home with his bare hands. He used to say, "As long as this house stands, you'll never have to depend on anyone." And now his daughter was trying to take it away in the name of planning for the future. I smiled faintly and said, "Your father wanted this home to stay in the family, Lydia, but I don't think he meant I'd be signing it over while I'm still breathing." She rolled her eyes, the same eyes that once looked up to me for guidance. "You're being stubborn, Mom. We're only trying to help you." "Help me?" I said quietly. "By pushing me out of my own home?" The silence stretched. Even Ethan's smirk faltered for a second. The air felt heavy, and for a moment I could hear my heartbeat louder than their words. That night, I saw something shift in my daughter's face, a coldness that didn't belong to the child I raised. It was as if she'd been coached, taught to see me not as her mother, but as an obstacle standing in the way of her comfort. I didn't say more. I just took another bite of the casserole I had baked for them, even though my appetite was gone. I wanted to believe we could move past it, that family meant something. But as I sat there under the dim chandelier light, with my daughter's husband watching me like a hawk waiting for weakness, I felt something in my chest. Not fear, not yet, but a deep sadness. A mother knows when love has turned into calculation. And sitting there, in my own home, I realized something that would keep me awake for nights to come. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to erase me. But I had no idea they'd already planned my future without asking me. I remember when Lydia was little, how her laughter used to fill every corner of our home. After her father passed, it was just the two of us against the world. Every scraped knee, every bad dream, every birthday candle, it was me holding her hand. I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over her head. There were nights I skipped dinner so she could have seconds. When she needed a new dress for prom and we couldn't afford one, I stayed up for 2 weeks sewing by hand, using leftover fabric from a neighbor's curtain shop. When she twirled in front of the mirror that night, her eyes glowed like a sunrise, and I thought to myself, all the sacrifices were worth it. She was my reason, my light, my world. But life has a cruel way of changing the people you love most. Somewhere along the way, the daughter who once held my hand through the dark began to see me as someone standing in her way. Maybe it started the day she met Ethan. He was charming, the kind of charm that's polished on the outside but hollow at the core. He spoke with confidence, carried himself like the world owed him something, and smiled in that way that made people trust him too easily. Lydia brought him home one evening, cheeks flushed, excitement in her voice as she said, "Mom, this is Ethan. He's in real estate. He's amazing." I remember shaking his hand, and though his grip was firm, it lingered a moment too long, as if he was already claiming something that wasn't his yet. Over dinner, he complimented my cooking, told jokes, made everyone laugh, but when the laughter faded, his eyes followed the walls of my home, measuring, studying. He asked questions no stranger should. "So, ma'am, this house looks like it's got history. Must be worth quite a bit these days, huh?" I brushed it off with a polite smile, not realizing that question would one day define everything. A few weeks later, Lydia started spending more time at his place. She'd come home late, distracted, glued to her phone. When I asked if everything was all right, she'd snap, "Mom, I'm an adult now. You don't have to worry about me." But I did. A mother always does. When they got engaged, Ethan looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've done your part, ma'am. Let us take it from here." I should have known then that when he said it, he didn't just mean Lydia, he meant everything that came with her. I still tried to keep the peace. I wanted to be happy for my daughter, to see her start her own life. After the wedding, they said they needed a little time to save up before buying a place. So they moved into my home. I didn't mind at first. The house felt full again, alive with the sound of their laughter and footsteps. I made breakfast for them, folded their laundry, even helped decorate their room with new curtains. I told myself it was temporary. But months turned into years, and soon it wasn't my house that felt full, it was my patience that felt empty. Ethan started making small changes without asking. He replaced furniture, repainted walls, even talked to the neighbors about our property as if he owned it. Lydia started correcting me in front of him, small jabs that cut deeper than she realized. Once, when I reminded her to pay the electric bill, she said, "Mom, Ethan handles those things now. You don't need to worry about it." And when I tried to discuss boundaries, she said, "You should be grateful we're even here. You'd be lonely without us." I stayed quiet because I didn't want to lose her. I thought maybe if I gave them time, things would balance out. But they didn't. One night, long after midnight, I woke up to the sound of voices coming from the living room. I tiptoed down the hall and stood by the half-open door. Ethan's voice was low, confident, laced with something I'd never heard before. "She won't last another 5 years," he said. "Once it's signed, we're set. We can finally move forward." My heart froze. Lydia didn't respond right away, and for a moment I hoped she'd tell him to stop. But instead, I heard her sigh. "I just want this done, Ethan. I'm tired of waiting." I stood there, trembling in the dark, listening to my only child speak about me like I was a problem to be solved. I wanted to scream, to burst into the room and remind her of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every hug that kept her safe when the world was cruel. But I couldn't move. My throat was locked, my body numb. When their voices faded and the lights went out, I walked back to my room in silence. That night, for the first time in my life, I locked my bedroom door. After that night, everything began to shift quietly at first, then all at once. Ethan became bolder, more controlling, as if my silence had given him permission. He started handling all the bills, insisting it was for my own good. Then, one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find the locks changed. My own keys didn't fit. I stood there, bags in hand, staring at the door I'd walked through for over 30 years. When Ethan finally opened it, he leaned against the frame with that smug little smile and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, we had to replace the locks for security reasons. Don't worry, Lydia and I will keep your new keys safe." He said it so casually, as if my own house no longer belonged to me. A few weeks later, my mail stopped coming. When I asked about it, Lydia waved her hand dismissively. "Ethan's sorting through your mail now, Mom. Some of those letters are confusing. We don't want you stressing yourself." Confusing. That word stung. I'd balanced our household, paid every bill, raised a child on a shoestring budget, and now, suddenly, I couldn't be trusted with my own mail? The woman I once called my daughter began looking at me with impatience instead of love. She'd sigh when I asked simple questions, roll her eyes when I spoke. One evening, as I tried to talk to her about how I felt shut out, she snapped, "Why are you making this hard for us, Mom? Don't you trust me?" Her voice cracked just slightly, part guilt, part annoyance, but my answer came out steady. "Trust doesn't require signatures, Lydia. Love doesn't need papers." She didn't say another word, just turned away and muttered, "You'll understand one day." But I already did. I understood that I was being pushed aside in my own life, in my own home. Soon after, whispers started spreading through the family. Cousins called less often. Old friends began speaking to me with that hesitant tone reserved for people you pity. I finally asked my sister about it, and her pause told me everything. "Lydia said you've been forgetful," she said gently. "She's just worried, that's all." Forgetful. Unstable. Those were the words they used. Words that make people stop listening to you. One Sunday, my niece came by with groceries and spoke to me like I was a child, slow, deliberate, soft. She glanced around the living room and said, "Lydia told us you've been leaving the stove on. Are you okay, Auntie?" I hadn't even cooked that week. I smiled through the ache in my chest and simply said, "I'm fine, dear." But when she left, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the silent stove, realizing what they were doing. They were rewriting my story while I was still alive to hear it. They wanted me to feel small, powerless, dependent. They wanted me to question my own mind, to doubt the woman who had once carried this family through every storm. And it worked, for a while. There were days I woke up and wondered if maybe I was losing it. Maybe I had misplaced a letter. Maybe I had forgotten something. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't confusion, it was control. You give your life to your children, pouring every ounce of love into them, believing that love will circle back when you're old and fragile. But one day, they make you feel like you're just in the way. The loneliness sank in deeper than any wound could. I stopped cooking dinners, stopped opening the curtains. The home that once smelled of coffee and laughter now felt like a quiet, padded cage. But just when I thought they couldn't break me any further, they did. Because I soon realized that all of this, the whispers, the locks, the control, was only preparation. Preparation for what they did next. I thought that was the lowest they could go, until the night of the family dinner. The night of the dinner began like any other family gathering, or at least, that's what they wanted it to look like. The table was set beautifully, golden lights glowing against polished silverware, the faint scent of roasted chicken and garlic butter drifting through the air. Laughter filled the room, but it wasn't real. It was thin, rehearsed, the kind of laughter people use when they're performing for others. Friends and relatives chatted politely, sipping wine, unaware or pretending not to be aware that something heavy hung in the air between us. Ethan was in his element, moving from one end of the table to the other, refilling glasses, complimenting the roast. flashing that perfect host's smile that fooled everyone but me. Lydia sat beside him, her smile forced, her fingers drumming nervously against her glass. Every now and then, her eyes darted toward me, then away again. I knew that look, the look of someone bracing for confrontation. After dinner, Ethan stood up, tapped his glass with a spoon, and cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said with that charming confidence that made strangers adore him. "I want to make a little announcement." The room quieted. I set my fork down, already sensing where this was going. He smiled broadly, his arm around Lydia's shoulder. "We've decided to start renovations on the house, big ones. It's time to bring this beautiful place into the modern age. But before we can do that," he paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sliding toward me, "we need Mom to officially hand over the deed. It'll make the process smoother with the bank and insurance." A few heads turned toward me. Someone clapped politely, thinking it was a normal discussion. I smiled faintly and said, "That's a lovely idea, Ethan, but I'm not signing anything tonight." For a brief second, the room froze. The sound of a fork clinking against a plate broke the silence. Ethan's smile twitched, his tone sharpening like a knife hidden behind velvet. "Mom," he said slowly, "we've talked about this. It's just paperwork. We're doing this for the family." I met his eyes. "Whose family?" I asked quietly. Lydia's voice cracked as she stood up, tears pooling in her eyes, though whether they were real or not, I couldn't tell. "Do you want me homeless, Mom? Do you want us to live on the street?" Her voice trembled with anger more than pain. "You're being selfish." I took a deep breath and said, "Lydia, this house was your father's and mine. It's the only thing I have left of him. You'll get it when the time is right, not before." That's when Ethan's patience snapped. He stepped closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. The grip was firm, too firm. His voice lowered. "You're making a scene, Mom. Don't do this in front of everyone." "I'm not making a scene," I said evenly, trying to pull away. But his hand tightened, fingers digging in. Then, before I could react, he shoved me. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough to send me stumbling back against the chair. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone stood up, then sat back down, uncertain. Lydia screamed, "Stop it, Ethan!" But her words came too late. When I tried to steady myself, she rushed forward, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "Why are you doing this to us, Mom?" she cried. Her face twisted with fury, and in one shocking motion, she grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked me toward the door. I remember the sound of chairs scraping, glasses shattering, and yet no one moved. Not one of them stepped in. They just stood there, frozen in their seats, eyes wide, lips sealed. In that moment, as my knees hit the floor, I realized something painful. Fear makes people silent, even when evil stands in front of them. And perhaps worse than the shove or the shouting was the quiet that followed the silence of those who chose comfort over conscience. But as I stood outside that house, the cold air biting against my face, something in me hardened. Because I wasn't done. Not yet. I had one last call to make. The moment the front door slammed behind me, the night air hit my face like a slap, cold, sharp, cleansing. My knees ached, my hair was tangled, and a dull throb pulsed in my shoulder where Ethan's hand had pushed me. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, staring at the faint light spilling from the dining room window. Inside, I could hear muffled laughter, theirs. My family. My own daughter, raising a glass to celebrate my humiliation. I tightened my grip on my purse and took a slow breath. For the first time that night, I wasn't trembling. There was no panic, no pleading left in me, only purpose. I walked down the front steps carefully, one hand against the railing for balance. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I crossed the yard toward the old oak tree by the mailbox, the same place I used to wait for Lydia's school bus all those years ago. It felt almost poetic, that after all the love, the sacrifices, and the years of silence, this was where I would take the first step toward reclaiming everything. I opened my purse, took out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in over 2 years. It rang once, twice. Then a deep, steady voice answered. "I've been expecting this call." I didn't waste words. "It's time," I said simply. No anger, no bitterness, just certainty. The line was quiet for a heartbeat. Then I heard papers rustling, the sound of movement, of something set in motion. "Understood," he replied. "I'll take it from here." I hung up, slipped the phone back into my bag, and exhaled. My hands no longer shook. The fear that had lived inside me for months was gone. In its place, there was calm, the kind that only comes when you finally stop running. I stood under that oak tree for a moment longer, listening to the distant hum of the highway. Then, far down the road, a pair of headlights flickered to life. They were faint at first, almost blending into the darkness, but I knew exactly whose car that was. Somewhere across town, a man had just ended his dinner early. He sat alone in his car, the glow of his dashboard lighting up a face that had seen too much of the world's cruelty to be easily shaken. On the passenger seat beside him was a folder worn, thick, and sealed with a single red tab marked Estate. He looked at it for a moment, then closed it carefully, started the engine, and pulled into the road. 30 minutes later, I whispered to myself, that call would turn their world upside down. I could almost picture it, the clinking of glasses, the hollow laughter echoing through my dining room as they toasted to what they thought was their victory. They had no idea that as they laughed at my expense, the man who would rewrite everything was already on his way. And this time, it wouldn't be me on the floor. Inside the house, the celebration limped on, though the laughter had thinned to a nervous murmur. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure whether to pretend nothing had happened or to gather their things and leave. Lydia had reapplied her lipstick and pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan poured himself another drink, his hand trembling slightly, though he hid it well behind his arrogant grin. "To family," he said, raising his glass. The clinking that followed was timid, hollow, more out of habit than joy. I watched it all from the window, just far enough away that they couldn't see me. Every flicker of movement inside that room was burned into my memory. And then, as the grandfather clock struck the half-hour, it happened. The sound was faint at first, a steady knock, firm and deliberate, the kind of knock that carried authority, the kind that silenced a room. Forks froze mid-air, conversations died mid-sentence, all eyes turned toward the front door. Ethan frowned, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Who's that?" he muttered, irritation thick in his tone. Lydia glanced at him, unease creeping into her expression. He walked toward the door, his shoes echoing sharply against the polished floor. When the door creaked open, the air itself seemed to pause. A man stood there, tall, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers stood at attention, and beside them, a woman holding a thick folder pressed to her chest. The scent of rain followed them into the room, along with something else, the weight of consequence. The man took one slow step inside, his voice calm but commanding. "Good evening," he said. "My name is Richard Harlow, representing the estate of Mrs. Eleanor Pierce." The name fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples through the crowd. Lydia's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Ethan's smirk faltered. The man continued, his tone professional but edged with finality. "As of this morning, this property and all associated assets have been legally transferred into a federally protected trust under elder law. Any further attempts to manipulate, coerce, or harm Mrs. Pierce will be treated as criminal offenses." He glanced briefly at the officers. "Effective immediately, a restraining order has been filed against both Lydia and Ethan Pierce. You are to vacate the premises by sunrise." The words struck like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Phones appeared in trembling hands, recording the scene as whispers spread like wildfire. "Is this real? Did she call the police? What's going on?" Lydia collapsed into a chair, her body shaking, tears streaking down her face. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you didn't have to do this." Ethan's rage erupted, his voice booming. "You think you can do this to us?" he shouted. "We took care of you. We gave you a place to live." The lawyer's eyes didn't waver. "Actually," he said, "she gave you a place to live, and she's decided to take it back." I stepped inside then, the faint sound of my shoes on the hardwood floor turning every head in the room. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence that met me was louder than any words I could have said. I looked at Lydia, her face streaked with mascara, her hands trembling in her lap. I looked at Ethan, his jaw tight, fury in his eyes but fear beneath it. And then I looked at the lawyer, the same man who had handled my late husband's affairs decades ago, and gave him a small nod. He turned to the crowd. "For those of you present," he said, "I suggest you remember what you witnessed here tonight. This is not just a matter of inheritance, it's a matter of dignity, and the law protects that." The room was dead quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the muffled sobs of my daughter. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood there and watched the faces that once called me family crumble into fear. But that wasn't all he brought with him. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lydia's quiet sobs filled the silence, her mascara-streaked cheeks glistening under the chandelier's light. Ethan stood by the doorway, his fists clenched, his pride unraveling. The lawyer cleared his throat softly, his voice even but heavy with purpose. "There's one more thing," he said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a second envelope, aged, yellowed at the edges, sealed with an embossed stamp that seemed untouched by time. He held it up, and the room stilled once more. "This," he continued, "was discovered in a secured deposit box belonging to the late Mr. Harold Pierce, your husband." The sound of my husband's name, spoken after so many years of silence, sent a tremor through my chest. Lydia's head snapped up, confusion etched into her face. "My father?" she whispered. The lawyer nodded. "Yes. Before his passing, Mr. Pierce left specific instructions to withhold this will unless certain conditions were violated. Those conditions have now been met." He unfolded the document carefully, his eyes scanning the first lines before reading aloud. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor Pierce, the woman who stood beside me through every storm I leave our home, our savings, and every possession we built together. To our daughter, Lydia." He paused, his voice steady but deliberate. "I leave my love and prayers, but no inheritance should she ever raise a hand or voice in greed against her mother." The words fell like stones in a still pond, the echoes lingering in the air long after he stopped reading. Gasps rippled through the room. One guest covered her mouth, another murmured, "He knew." The lawyer lowered the paper slowly, his eyes meeting mine. "Justice," he said quietly, "even from the grave." Lydia's sobs deepened, raw and broken, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than pride. She sank to her knees, clutching the hem of her dress, her voice trembling. "Mom, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just thought—" Her words dissolved into tears. I looked down at her, not with anger, but with an ache that years of motherhood never prepare you for the ache of watching your child lose herself to the very greed you once protected her from. Ethan exhaled sharply, his composure slipping away like water through his fingers. "This is insane," he muttered, voice rising with desperation. "You can't do this. You can't take everything from us." The lawyer turned toward him, unflinching. "You took everything from yourself," he said quietly. Ethan glared at him, then at me, his face flushed, his jaw tightening before storming toward the door. "You'll regret this," he spat, but the words carried no power anymore. The front door slammed behind him, leaving a hollow echo that felt like closure. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the guests who had sat frozen in silence began to stir. Some approached me softly, placing their hands on my shoulders, their eyes filled with quiet respect. One older woman whispered, "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Don't you doubt it." I stood there, surrounded not by family, but by witnesses to truth. The same room that had seen my humiliation now stood as a testament to my strength. My voice, when it came, was steady, softer than I expected. "But sure, I didn't need revenge," I said, almost to myself. "I just needed the truth." The lawyer closed his folder, offering me a small, knowing smile. "And tonight," he said gently, "it finally found its way home." I nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. "Yes," I whispered, my eyes lifting toward the ceiling as if speaking to my late husband, and it walked in wearing a gray suit and a calm smile. Peace doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly in the shape of a new home, the sound of laughter from kind neighbors, and mornings that no longer begin with fear. I moved out of that house and started fresh. My new place was small, but it was mine, filled with light, flowers, and freedom. Every sunrise reminded me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace, again and again. Months later, Lydia divorced Ethan. The two of them, once so united in greed, now torn apart by the very lies they built. And though she tried to reach out, to apologize, I knew forgiveness had to come slowly, like spring after a long winter. Sometimes love must be tough. Sometimes silence must speak louder than tears. To every mother who's ever been silenced, humiliated, or betrayed, remember this. Your worth doesn't vanish because they forget it. You are not what they said about you. You are what you survived. One phone call changed everything, but what truly saved me was finally standing up for myself. If you've ever had to choose peace over pain, share this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories like this one.